There is a diner on Main Street in a town I am not going to name yet. The sign out front is hand-painted. The booths are upholstered in red vinyl that has been patched 17 times. The jukebox in the corner still plays 45s, and the selection has not been updated since the Eisenhower administration. But none of that is what stopped me cold the first time I walked through the door. What stopped me was the menu. Single laminated page, handwritten in blue ballpoint pen. The handwriting is small, neat, slightly slanted to the right. The prices have been changed over the years, crossed out, rewritten, crossed out again. But the handwriting itself has never changed. Because the woman who wrote that menu in 1958 had a granddaughter. And the granddaughter, who runs the place now, refuses to print it. She refuses to type it. She refuses to laminate a clean version. Every time the prices change, she crosses out the old number and writes the new one in the exact same script her grandmother used. She practiced it as a child. She practices it still. And when I asked her why, she looked at me like I had insulted her dead. She said, "My grandmother's hand wrote this town into existence. I am not going to erase it for a tourist who wants something cleaner." That is where this episode starts. Not in nostalgia, not in some Disneyland recreation of the 1950s with chrome and poodle skirts and a gift shop selling "I Like Ike" pins. This is the real version. The version where Walmart never opened. The version where the median home was not bought. It was inherited. Where the post office has had 4 postmasters since World War II, and 3 of them shared a last name. Where the federal census takers stopped showing up because the population number had not moved in so long they decided their data was already accurate enough. This is the America that said no. No to the interstate. No to the chain. No to the corporate buyout. No to the franchise. No to the algorithm. No to the metric. No to whatever this country decided to call progress between 1960 and right now. I am Report State. I drive a long bed truck with 190,000 miles on it and a notebook on the passenger seat. I have spent the better part of a year crossing the lower 48 and one piece of Alaska looking for towns that did not modernize. Not towns that pretend they did not modernize. Not towns that put up a fake 50s facade for the tourists. Real towns. Towns where the gas pump still has a mechanical counter that clicks. Towns where the bank closes at 3 because that is when the banker goes home for lunch and he never comes back. Towns where a man named Earl Whittier has been the volunteer fire chief since 1963 and nobody has thought to replace him because he has not died and he is not asked to retire. I drove through a town in Kansas where the Christmas decorations on the lampposts were the same Christmas decorations they hung in 1956, and they hang them every year, and when one bulb burns out, the hardware store in the corner has a drawer of replacement bulbs from the original shipment, and the drawer is still about half full. Today I am going to count down 10 of these places, from number 10 to number 1. And before you ask, yes, number 1 is the strangest of them all. Number 1 is a town where the Federal Statistical Division literally stopped updating the data in 1980 because the town was, quote, too small to be of interest. Number 1 is a town where the last new house was built in a year I will tell you when we get there, and you are going to do the math, and you are going to feel something move in your chest. Number 1 is a town with 1 stoplight, 1 family, and a calendar on a kitchen wall that has not been turned to the next month in 70 years. Not because they forgot, because they decided. Before we get into it, do me a favor, subscribe, hit the bell, because Google Maps is not going to drive you to the truth of these towns. Google Maps will get you to the gas station outside the town. The rest you have to walk, and I am going to walk it with you. Let's break it down. Number 10, Buford, Wyoming, or as the locals used to call it, the loneliest town in America. Buford sits on Interstate 80 between Cheyenne and Laramie at an elevation of just over 8,000 feet. It was founded in 1866 as a Union Pacific Railroad outpost, and at its peak in the late 1800s, it had a population of around 2,000 people. Soldiers, railroad workers, their families, a school, a post office, a general store. By the 1950s, Buford had collapsed down to a few dozen residents, then a few, and then, for a long stretch of years, from 2000 to 2012, the town of Buford had exactly one official resident. His name was Don Salmons. He had moved there with his wife and son in 1990. His wife passed away, his son grew up and moved away, and Don Salmons, all by himself, kept the town legally alive. He was the mayor, he was the postmaster, he was the gas station attendant, he ran the convenience store, he plowed the road. He was, in the most literal sense the United States Census Bureau will allow, a town of one. Now here is what makes Buford a 50s freeze, and not just a curiosity. The convenience store is original construction. The gas pumps were updated only when federal regulation made it illegal not to update them. And even then, Don Salmons kept the old pumps standing next to the new ones because, in his words, somebody might want to see what a real pump looked like. The post office in Buford has the same wooden mail slots from 1953. Don sold the town at auction in 2012 to a Vietnamese coffee company for $900,000, which sounds like a lot until you remember he sold an entire town. The new owners renamed it Findley Town Buford and tried to turn it into a coffee marketing operation. It did not work. It was never going to work. Because the thing that made Buford valuable was the thing the new owners could not buy. They could buy the buildings, they could buy the road, they could buy the sign. They could not buy Don Salmons standing on the porch of the convenience store at 5 in the afternoon, watching the sun go down over the Laramie Range with no other human being for 14 miles in any direction. That is not a product. That is a way of being alive that the rest of America abandoned about 65 years ago. I drove through Buford on a Tuesday in October. The wind was 35 miles an hour straight off the high plain. The convenience store was open. The gas pumps were working. There was a single semi-truck parked at the diesel pump, and the driver was inside buying a coffee. I asked the man behind the counter, who was not Don Salmons because Don has long since moved on, if anything had changed since the 1950s. He looked at me for a long second, and then he said, "Mister, the wind has not changed since the 1850s. Why would anything else?" Number 9. Whittier, Alaska. If Buford is the town of one, Whittier is the town of one building. Whittier is a small port town on the Prince William Sound, about 60 miles southeast of Anchorage. To get to Whittier, you have to drive through a tunnel, specifically the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, which is 2.5 miles long, was originally built by the U.S. Army during World War II as a railroad tunnel, and only began carrying automobile traffic in the year 2000. Before that, you got to Whittier by boat or by train, and that was it. The tunnel only fits one direction of traffic at a time. Cars in, then cars out, then a train, then cars in again. The tunnel closes at 10:30 at night. If you are not out by 10:30, you are staying in Whittier until morning. The population of Whittier is about 270 people. And here's the part that, when I first read it in a Smithsonian Magazine article from 2014, I did not believe. Almost every single one of those 270 people lives in the same building. One building. A 14-story concrete tower called Begich Towers. Built by the U.S. Army in 1956 as military housing during the Cold War, originally meant to house soldiers stationed at the port. When the military pulled out in the 60s, the building was sold off and converted into civilian condos. And for whatever reason, Whittier never expanded outward. The building stayed, the town stayed, and the people stayed inside the building. Inside Begich Towers there is a post office, a police station, a grocery store, a laundromat, a church, a health clinic. A school is across the parking lot in another building. But in winter, when the snow gets to 9 and 10 feet deep and the wind off the sound is hitting 50 miles an hour, there is an underground tunnel from the tower to the school so that the kids never have to step outside. Think about that. There are children in Whittier, Alaska, who go an entire winter, November to April, without setting foot on the actual surface of the planet. They live on floor 7. They take the elevator down to the lobby. They walk through the underground passage. They go to school. They come back. They take the elevator up. That is their entire world for 5 months out of the year. Now, why is this 50s freeze? Because Begich Towers is a 1956 building running on 1956 logic. The hallways are painted that institutional green that you only see in Cold War military buildings. The mailboxes in the lobby are original brass. The radiators clank like a Navy ship. The intercom system was upgraded once in 1978 and has not been touched since. There is a community room on the first floor where the residents hold potlucks every Friday night, and the linoleum floor is the original linoleum, and the folding chairs are the same folding chairs the Army left behind when they pulled out. People in Whittier do not move to Whittier for the modern conveniences. They move to Whittier because they want to live in 1956 in a concrete tower at the edge of the world. The fishing boats in the harbor are mostly old. The diesel pump on the dock is from the late 60s. The one restaurant in the lobby of the tower serves halibut and chips on a paper plate, and the recipe has not changed since the woman who started the restaurant arrived in 1961. I asked a man in the lobby of Begich Towers, a retired school teacher named Frank Halsey, why he stayed. He said, "My wife died here. My friends are here. The mountain is here. The water is here. What does the rest of the world have that I need?" I did not have an answer for him. I still do not have an answer for him. Number 8. Mineral, Virginia. About 40 miles northwest of Richmond, in Louisa County, sits a town that the rest of Virginia forgot. Mineral was incorporated in 1890, and it was named for the gold and pyrite mining that briefly happened there in the late 1800s. The mines closed before World War I. The railroad that served the mines downgraded to a local freight line. By the 1950s, Mineral was a small farm service town with a population of around 400 people, a feed store, a hardware store, a pharmacy, a diner, a bank, and a single Baptist church on the corner of Main Street and First Street. Today, more than 70 years later, Mineral has a population of around 500 people. The feed store, the hardware store, the pharmacy, the diner, the bank, and the Baptist church are all still on the exact same corners. The bank has changed names twice, but it has been in the same building since 1948. The pharmacy still has a soda fountain in the back. Not a recreation of a soda fountain, the actual soda fountain that has been there since 1952. They serve cherry phosphates. The recipe is written on an index card that is taped to the back of the counter. The card has yellowed. The handwriting is faded. Nobody types it up because the woman who runs the pharmacy, whose name is Beverly McKenna, says the index card is part of the recipe. Mineral got famous for about 6 minutes in 2011, when an earthquake centered nearby cracked the Washington Monument. Reporters showed up. They took pictures of the cracked sidewalks, they interviewed the locals, and then they left, and Mineral went back to being Mineral. The diner on Main Street is the same diner. The menu has changed prices, but not items, since 1956. The owner is a man named Charlie Rourke, who inherited the place from his father, who inherited it from his father. Charlie is 68 years old. He gets to the diner at 4:30 in the morning to start the grits. He told me he has not taken a vacation since 1992, and the only reason he took one then was because his daughter was getting married in Florida. He went to the wedding. He came back. He has not left Louisa County since. What freezes Mineral in time is not the buildings, it is the economy. There is no Walmart within 15 miles. There is no chain pharmacy. The closest interstate is far enough that nobody passing through ever stops. The young people leave. They go to Richmond. They go to Northern Virginia. They go to North Carolina. The ones who stay are the ones who inherited something. A house, a business, a piece of land. The median age in Mineral is nearly 10 years older than the Virginia state average. and the houses on the side streets are the same houses that were on the side streets in the 1950 census, and most of them have been owned by the same families the entire time. Number 7. Cuba, Missouri. Cuba sits on what used to be U.S. Route 66, which means that until the late 1960s, Cuba was a thriving stop on the most famous road in America. Trucks came through, tourists came through. Travelers heading from Chicago to Los Angeles, or Los Angeles to Chicago, stopped in Cuba for gas, for food, for a motel room. The Wagon Wheel Motel on Route 66 in Cuba was built in 1936, and it has operated continuously every single year since. The neon sign out front has been replaced once, in 1947, and that 1947 sign is the sign that is still hanging there today. Then in 1967, Interstate 44 was completed through Missouri, and the traffic that had once flowed through Cuba on Route 66 suddenly flowed past Cuba on Interstate 44. The bypass killed the local economy in about 3 years. The truck stops closed, 2 of the 4 gas stations closed, 1 of the 3 motels closed, the diner on the corner of Main and Washington went bankrupt and was bought for almost nothing by a woman named Hazel Crowder, who reopened it under a new name and ran it on her own until she died in 1996. Her son runs it now. The booths are the same booths Hazel wiped down every morning for 30 years. What makes Cuba a 50s freeze is the murals. In 2001, a local committee decided to commemorate the town's Route 66 history by commissioning a series of large outdoor murals on the sides of buildings. The murals depict scenes from the town's 1940s and 1950s heyday. A Greyhound bus pulling up, a family at a soda fountain, a traveling salesman at the Wagon Wheel Motel. The murals are stunning. But the strange thing is, when you walk down Main Street in Cuba, you cannot tell where the murals end and the actual present-day town begins. Because the actual present-day town looks almost exactly like the murals. The wagon wheel sign is still there. The barber shop with the spinning pole is still there. The hardware store is still there. The drugstore is still there. The murals were not commemorating a lost past. They were commemorating a present that simply refused to leave. I sat in the diner in Cuba on a Wednesday morning at 6:30. There were 8 men at the counter, all of them over 60. They were drinking coffee out of the same heavy white mugs the diner has used since the 1950s. They were arguing about the price of soybeans, about the high school football team, about a county road commissioner who had just announced his retirement. None of them looked at a phone. None of them had a laptop. The radio behind the counter was playing a country station out of Rolla, and the song that was playing was a Hank Williams Sr. song from 1949. I asked the man on the stool next to me, whose name turned out to be Dale Pruitt, how often he came to the diner. He said, "Every morning since I got out of the Army in 1973. Same stool, same coffee, same time." I asked him why. He said, "Because I know what is going to be here when I walk in. I know who is going to be sitting next to me. I know what the eggs are going to taste like. The world out there does not give you that anymore. This place gives you that." Number 6. Lucas, Kansas. Lucas is a town of about 360 people in the rolling Smoky Hills of north-central Kansas. It was founded in 1887, and for most of its history, it was an unremarkable farming community. Wheat, cattle, a grain elevator, a general store, a church. The kind of town that you would drive through on a state highway and not remember 10 miles later. What makes Lucas extraordinary is a single man and a single project. In 1907, a Civil War veteran and self-taught artist named Samuel Perry Dinsmore began constructing a sculpture garden on his property in Lucas. He used concrete. He sculpted Adam and Eve, the devil, soldiers, angels, allegorical figures representing labor and capital. He called it the Garden of Eden. He worked on it until his death in 1932. He was buried inside it, in a glass-topped concrete coffin he built for himself. You can still see his body. It is, by any measure, one of the strangest pieces of folk art in the United States. Now, here is why Lucas matters for this list. The Garden of Eden was already a tourist curiosity by the 1950s, and the town of Lucas, instead of modernizing around it, decided to build its identity entirely around outsider folk art. They opened the Grassroots Art Center. They preserved the Garden of Eden. They painted the public restrooms downtown to look like a giant ceramic toilet. I am not making that up. The public restroom in downtown Lucas, Kansas, is shaped like a piece of pottery, and the building was decorated by a folk artist named Eric Abraham. The town leaned into being weird. They leaned into being small. They leaned into being seen. Walking through downtown Lucas is like walking through 1955 with a thin coat of paint. The Brandt's Market on the corner has been operated by the Brandt family since 1922. The same family. 5 generations. They make their own bologna in the back of the store. The recipe is from a German immigrant grandfather. The smokehouse out back is the same smokehouse from 1938. The hardware store across the street is the same hardware store from 1949. The post office has the same brass mailboxes from 1951. I asked the current owner of Brandt's Market, a man named Doug Brandt, why he had not modernized the bologna recipe. He laughed at me. He said, "Mister, you want me to modernize a recipe that has worked for 103 years? What would you like me to add? Soy? Antibiotics? A QR code?" He kept laughing for a while. Then he sliced me a piece of the bologna, free, on a sheet of butcher paper, and I ate it, standing in the doorway of his market, while a stray cat watched me from the sidewalk. It was the best bologna I have ever had in my life. Number 5. Story, Indiana. Story is not really a town in the legal sense anymore. Story is what is left of a town. It sits in Brown County, in the wooded hills of southern Indiana, about an hour south of Indianapolis. Story was founded in the 1850s as a logging and farming community. At its peak in the 1890s, it had a population of around 200 people, a school, a post office, 2 general stores, a blacksmith, a grain mill, and a one-room church. By the 1920s, the timber was gone, the farming had collapsed, and Story was emptying out fast. By the 1950s, the population was in the single digits. By the 1970s, the population was 0, and then something strange happened. In the 1970s, a couple from out of town bought the entire town of Story. The general store, the houses, the church, the land. They reopened the general store as the Story Inn. They turned the old houses into rental cabins. They restored the church. They restored the post office. And they did it without modernizing any of it. The Story Inn still uses the original wooden bar from 1894. The dining room is lit by gas lamps that have been converted to electric but kept the original fixtures. The kitchen serves food on plates that the previous owners left behind in the 1940s. The cabins have no televisions. The cabins barely have working internet. The cabins are heated by wood stoves, and the wood is cut from the surrounding forest. The town of Story has been bought and sold a few times in the past 30 years. Each new owner has, to their credit, kept the same approach. Do not modernize. Do not chain. Do not franchise. Keep it frozen. Keep it true. The current operators of Story have a small staff that lives on site. The cook in the kitchen, the bartender, the manager, the housekeeper. They live in the cabins behind the inn. They eat dinner together every night. They sit on the porch of the general store after dark and watch the deer come down Aldous wavy in the way that only hand-blown 19th century glass is wavy. There was no clock in the cabin. There was no television. There was a kerosene lamp on the bedside table with matches in case the power went out. I lay in that bed and I listened to the sound of the woods at night, and I thought about the fact that Sarah Yater had probably listened to the same sound from the same bed in the same room for 65 years, and that the sound had not changed in the 70 years between her death and my visit. The wind in the oak trees, the owl, the frogs in the creek behind the inn. Some things do not get updated because they cannot be updated. They are already exactly what they are. Number 4, Eureka, Nevada. Highway 50 across the middle of Nevada is officially called the loneliest road in America. It earned that name in 1986 when Life magazine published a piece warning travelers not to drive it without survival skills. The road runs 360 miles between Carson City and the Utah border, crossing 7 mountain ranges and 7 valleys. There are 5 towns on it. One of them is Eureka. Eureka has a population of around 600 people. It was founded in 1864 as a silver mining town. At its peak in the 1870s, it had 10,000 residents and was the second largest town in Nevada. The mines petered out. The population collapsed. By the 1950s, Eureka had stabilized at around 500 people, and it has hovered between 500 and 700 ever since. What makes Eureka extraordinary is that the downtown is a National Register Historic District, and the buildings in that district are almost all original 1870s and 1880s construction. The Eureka Opera House, built in 1880, is still in use. The Jackson House Hotel, built in 1877, is still operating as a hotel. The Eureka Sentinel newspaper building, built in 1879, still houses the Historical Society. The courthouse on the main square is the original Eureka County Courthouse from 1879, and it is still the working courthouse. Court is held there. Land deeds are filed there. People get married there in front of a judge, whose office is in the same room where judges have held office for nearly 150 years. But what really froze Eureka was the period after the silver collapse. In the early 20th century, when most of America was rebuilding and modernizing, Eureka was so depopulated that there was no money and no labor and no reason to tear anything down. The buildings just sat there, empty, locked up. The wind blew through the streets. The roof on the Opera House slowly developed a leak. The wallpaper in the Jackson House faded. By the 1950s, when the rest of America was building suburbs and shopping centers, Eureka was a quiet, mostly empty downtown that had been pickled in time by sheer economic neglect. And then, in the 1970s and 80s, a small group of locals, supported by federal historic preservation funding, decided to restore those buildings exactly as they had been. Not to modernize, not to convert, to restore. So now you have a town of 600 people whose downtown looks like an extremely well-maintained 1885. The grocery store is in a modern building on the edge of town because there was no historic building available for a grocery store. The gas station is at the edge of town for the same reason. But the main 4 blocks of downtown Eureka are 19th century in a way that almost no other place in America is 19th century. There are people who live in Eureka and work in Eureka and shop in Eureka who functionally never see a building newer than 1905 from the moment they leave their house until the moment they return. I had dinner at the Owl Club bar in Eureka on a Friday night. The bar back is original 1895 woodwork. The tin ceiling is original. The pool table in the corner is from 1938. The bartender, a woman named Marian Petrosky, has been working there for 31 years. Her mother worked there for 40 years before her. Her grandmother worked there for 36 years before that. 3 generations of women in the same family, pouring beer behind the same bar in the same building. Marian told me that when she was a little girl, sitting at the end of the bar doing her homework while her mother worked, she would look up at the tin ceiling and try to count the squares. She said she still does. She said sometimes on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, when the bar is empty and the wind is howling down Main Street, she will pour herself a coffee and sit at the same end of the bar where she sat as a child, and she will look up at the tin ceiling and she will count the squares again, and it is the same number it has always been, and she finds that comforting in a way she cannot explain. Number 3, Bonanza, Colorado. If you want to find Bonanza on a map, you are going to have to look hard. It is in Saguache County in the San Luis Valley at an elevation of nearly 9,500 feet. The road in is unpaved for the last several miles. There is no cell service. There is no gas station. There is no store. There is no school. There is no post office anymore, although there used to be one. There is, technically, still a town, because Bonanza is incorporated. It has a charter. It has a town council. It holds elections. And as of the most recent census, it has a population of 6. 6 people. That is the entire town. 6 people who hold the town offices among themselves, who maintain the town's legal status, who pay the town's modest taxes, and who, every now and then, vote on town business at a meeting held in someone's living room. Bonanza was founded in 1880 as a silver mining town. At its peak in the 1880s, it had a population of around 1,500. The mines died. The town did not quite die. It just got very, very small. And then it stayed that way. What freezes Bonanza in time is not architectural. Most of the original buildings have collapsed or been removed. What freezes Bonanza is institutional. It is the fact that there is a town there, legally, operationally, with a charter and a seal and a set of meeting minutes that go back almost a century and a half. The current residents are a mix of retirees, a few hardy holdouts, and one family that has owned property in Bonanza since the 1890s. They live in cabins. They burn wood for heat. They drive into the larger valley for groceries. The mail comes through a rural route that drops everything off at a cluster of mailboxes on the road in. In winter, the road in can be impassable for days. The residents prepare for that. They keep stockpiles. They keep generators. They keep extra fuel. I drove the road into Bonanza in late October on a day when the sky was the color of slate, and the temperature was hovering around 28 degrees. The aspens had already dropped their leaves. The pines were dark and motionless. I met a man on the road, walking a black and white border collie, who turned out to be one of the 6 residents. His name was Howard Becker. He was 74 years old. He had moved to Bonanza in 1971 with his wife. His wife had passed away in 2008. He had stayed. He told me that in 1971, when he and his wife arrived, the town already felt frozen, already felt like it belonged to a previous era. He said the strangest thing about staying for 54 years is that the town has not aged around him. The town was already old when he got there. He has aged. The town has not. He looks more like Bonanza now than he did when he was 22. I asked him if he ever thought about leaving. He said he thought about it every winter, around February, when the road has been closed for a week, and the woodpile is getting low, and the wind is hitting the cabin so hard the windows rattle in their frames. He said he thinks about it. And then March comes, and the wind drops, and the first warm day arrives, and he sits on his porch with the border collie at his feet, and he watches the light move across the side of Antora Peak, and he knows he is never going to leave. He said, "The rest of America has decided what it is. I decided what I am a long time ago. I am here. That is all." Number 2, Rugby, North Dakota. Rugby is a town of about 2,500 people in Pierce County, North Dakota, on Highway 2 between Minot and Devil's Lake. It was founded in 1886 as a stop on the Great Northern Railway. It was named after Rugby, England by the railroad surveyors. And in 1931, the United States Geological Survey designated Rugby as the geographic center of the North American continent. They erected a stone obelisk on the side of the highway to mark the spot. The obelisk is still there. It is by a wide margin the most famous thing about Rugby. Now here is the part that matters for this episode. Rugby is, in many ways, a perfectly normal, small American town. There is a Walmart, there is a McDonald's, there is a Dairy Queen. So why is Rugby on this list? Because if you turn off the highway and you drive 2 blocks into the actual town of Rugby, you find a downtown that has not been substantially altered since approximately 1958. The Hotel Rugby, originally built in 1907, was renovated in 1949 and has not been renovated since. The Pioneer Village Museum on the edge of town is a collection of preserved buildings from the late 1800s and early 1900s, and the museum is run by a small group of volunteers, several of whom are older than 70 and have been volunteering at the museum since the 1980s. The downtown shops in Rugby are independent. The drugstore is a family-owned drugstore that has been in the same family for 4 generations. The hardware store is independent. The bakery is independent. The diner on the corner of the main intersection serves the same hot beef sandwich it has served since 1961, on the same kind of plate with the same kind of gravy. The waitress who took my order on a Tuesday morning, a woman named Patricia Gunderson, told me she had worked at that diner for 43 years. Her mother had been a waitress there for 35 years before her. The diner has had 3 owners in those 78 years, and all 3 owners have agreed, in writing, to never change the menu. What freezes rugby is geography. North Dakota is a long way from anywhere. Pierce County has a population of around 4,000 people across nearly 900 square miles. The economic incentives that have hollowed out so many small American towns, the chain stores, the franchise restaurants, the consolidated retail, do not entirely apply to rugby because there are not enough people in any direction to make a large modernization profitable. The Walmart on the edge of town is enough. There is no need for a second one. There is no need for a Target. There is no need for a Trader Joe's. The downtown is the downtown is the downtown. It has been since the Eisenhower administration. It probably will be for another 40 years at least. The geographic center of North America Monument is a small thing on the side of the highway. A stone obelisk maybe 15 feet tall. There is a flag. There is a small interpretive sign. There is a parking lot. People stop, take a picture, get back in their cars, and keep driving. Most of them never go into the actual town. They never see the diner. They never meet Patricia Gunderson. They never sit in the lobby of the Hotel Rugby and look at the photographs on the wall. Photographs from 1907 and 1929 and 1948 and 1963. And realize that the lobby itself has not changed in any meaningful way across all of those photographs. The chairs are different chairs, the carpet is different carpet, but the room is the same room. The light comes through the windows the same way. The clock on the wall ticks the same way. I sat in that lobby for almost an hour on the morning I was in rugby. I drank a cup of coffee from a pot that the front desk clerk, a young woman named Hannah Lindstrom, had brewed for me. She was 23 years old. She had grown up in rugby. She had gone to college in Grand Forks. She had come home. I asked her why she came home. She said, "Because I missed knowing what time the bakery opens." She said, "In Grand Forks, I knew the bakery opened at 7, but in rugby, I knew the baker. I knew that he opened at 6:45 if it was below 0. Because the dough takes longer to rise. I knew that on Wednesdays, he made the cinnamon rolls bigger because his granddaughter came to visit on Wednesdays, and she liked the bigger ones. I knew that he sang to himself when he worked, and the song was always the same song, and the song was Patsy Cline's Crazy. I missed knowing things like that, so I came home. Before we get to number 1, I want you to understand something. The 9 towns I have just walked you through are towns that froze for 9 different reasons. Buford froze because the population shrank to 1. Whittier froze because the architecture concentrated everyone into one Cold War tower. Mineral froze because the economy never gave anyone a reason to rebuild. Cuba froze because the interstate killed the highway it lived on. Lucas froze because the town leaned into being a folk art curiosity. Story froze because a series of owners decided to keep it frozen on purpose. Eureka froze because the silver collapse gave the buildings 100 years of neglect that became, eventually, preservation. Bonanza froze because there was almost nobody left to change anything. Rugby froze because the geography of North Dakota does not support the velocity of American change. 9 reasons, 9 towns, 9 versions of the same thing. But number 1 is different. Number 1 is not a town that froze. Number 1 is a town that was already frozen when the rest of America started moving, and it has stood there, motionless, while the country it belongs to has reinvented itself 8 or 9 times. If those 9 other towns are freezers, number 1 is a vacuum. There is no air in number 1. There is no time in number 1. There is one house, there is one family, there is one stoplight, and there is a calendar in a kitchen that has not had its page turned in 70 years. Let's go. Number 1, Centerville, Pennsylvania. Now I have to tell you something before we go any further. There are several places in Pennsylvania called Centerville. There are several places in the United States called Centerville. The Centerville I am about to describe is not the most famous one. It is, in fact, by design, a place that the rest of the country does not know exists. It sits in the rural middle of the state, off a state route that nobody takes unless they have a specific reason to take it. It is not on the way to anywhere. The nearest interstate is far enough that you can drive for 40 minutes without seeing a single fast food sign. Centerville, by the most recent estimate, has a population of fewer than 30 people. The town was incorporated in 1868. It had a peak population of about 350 in 1910, when there was a small coal-related operation in the next valley over. The operation closed in 1941. The population began to bleed out. By the 1950s, the town was already small. By 1980, the Federal Statistical Division responsible for tracking small municipal data made a quiet decision. They classified Centerville as too small to be of independent statistical interest. They folded its data into the surrounding township. They stopped issuing separate reports. The town, in a literal bureaucratic sense, fell off the federal map. It still exists. It still has a charter. It still has a road sign. It is still on the state's rolls. But the federal government, the engine that produces the data that the rest of the country uses to know what the rest of the country is, stopped looking at Centerville in 1980. The town has one stoplight. The stoplight is at the intersection of the state route and the only paved cross street. The stoplight was installed in 1963. The bulbs have been replaced many times. The mechanism has not. The stoplight cycles red, yellow, green on a fixed timer because there is not enough cross traffic to justify a sensor. The timer is set to the same intervals it was set to in 1963. The town has one general store, which is closed 3 days a week. The town has one church, which holds services every other Sunday because the pastor is shared with 2 other towns. The town has one cemetery, which is across the road from the church. The town has one volunteer fire station, which is staffed by 4 men who all live within 2 miles of the building. The town has one post office, which is open from 9 in the morning until 11:30 in the morning, Monday through Saturday, and is run by a woman named Eleanor Hartwig, who was born in Centerville in 1949 and has been the postmaster since 1981. And then there is the house. The house sits at the edge of town, on a slight rise overlooking the valley. It is a 2-story, white clapboard farmhouse. It was built in 1892. The same family has lived in it since it was built, 5 generations. The current occupants are a woman named Margaret Voss, who is in her late 70s, her son Daniel Voss, who is in his early 50s, and Daniel's daughter Caitlin Voss, who is in her mid-20s. 3 generations under one roof. Margaret was born in the house in 1948. Daniel was born in the house in 1971. Caitlin was born in a hospital, but she was brought home to the house when she was 3 days old, and she has lived there ever since, including through her college years, when she commuted an hour each way to her classes rather than move out. I went to the house on a Sunday afternoon in early November. I had written a letter to Margaret 2 months in advance, the old way, with a stamp, because the family does not use email much. I had received a letter back, in handwriting that looked like it had been taught by a Palmer Method textbook. The letter said I could come on the first Sunday in November, after lunch but before the early dark. And I should plan to be there for about 2 hours. I arrived at 1:45 in the afternoon. Margaret met me at the door in a dress she had made herself. A simple cotton dress in a small floral print that would not have been out of place on her own grandmother. She invited me in. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table. Caitlin was standing at the kitchen counter, slicing an apple pie that Margaret had baked that morning. The kitchen was the kitchen. I want you to understand what I mean when I say the kitchen was the kitchen. The kitchen had been remodeled twice in its history. Once in 1928, when electricity was added. Once in 1953, when the wood stove was replaced with a gas range and a new linoleum floor was put down. Since 1953, the kitchen had not been remodeled. The cabinets were the cabinets. The counters were the counters. The light fixtures were the light fixtures. The gas range was the same gas range. The refrigerator had been replaced 4 times because refall, beside the refrigerator, was the calendar. The calendar was a Currier and Ives wall calendar from 1955. It depicted a winter scene, horses pulling a sleigh through a snowy New England village. The calendar was hanging from a single nail. The page that was visible was the month of the year that I will not name precisely because Margaret asked me not to. She said, "The month is not the point. The point is that it has not changed. The point is that I refuse to change it." I asked her why. She told me that her mother had hung the calendar on that nail in January of 1955. Her mother had been 24 years old. Her father had bought the calendar at a hardware store in the next town over. Her mother had loved the picture. Her mother had loved the colors. Her mother had hung it on the nail and had turned the page faithfully every month for the entire year. And then, at the end of December 1955, her mother had not taken the calendar down. Her mother had simply turned the page back to the month she liked best, the month of the winter sleigh, and had left it there. Margaret said her mother had told her once, when Margaret was a child, that 1955 had been the best year of her life. Margaret had been 7 years old. Her father had been alive and well. The farm had had a good harvest. The country had felt, to her mother, like a country that knew what it was. And her mother had decided, quietly, that the calendar was going to stay on that month forever, as a kind of private vow. Her mother had passed away in 1972. The calendar had stayed on the nail. Margaret had not taken it down. Daniel had been born by then. Margaret had decided, in her own quiet way, to honor her mother's vow. She had not turned the page. She had not replaced the calendar. She had simply let it hang. When the paper began to yellow in the late 1980s, Margaret had carefully removed the calendar from the nail and had taken it to a framing shop in a city about an hour away. She had asked the framer to encase the calendar in archival glass, with archival backing, with ultraviolet protection. The framer had done it. The calendar had come home. It had gone back on the nail. It had stayed there ever since. Daniel told me, in a quiet voice, that he had grown up under that calendar. That he had eaten his cereal under that calendar every morning of his childhood. That he had not understood, as a small child, that the calendar was unusual. That he had assumed, until he was about 8 years old, that all calendars stayed on one page forever. That when he had figured out, at school, that calendars were supposed to change, he had come home and asked his mother why their calendar did not change. And his mother had told him, simply, that their calendar was different. Their calendar was a memory, and memories do not move. Caitlin told me that when she was little, she used to stand on a chair and look at the picture on the calendar very carefully. She used to look at the horses, the sleigh, the little red barn in the background, the 2 figures in the sleigh, a man in a black coat and a woman in a green coat with a fur muff. She used to make up stories about the man and the woman, where they were going, what they were going to do when they got there. She told me she had probably looked at that picture more times than anyone else alive, and she had never gotten tired of it, because the picture was always the same. And there was something about the sameness that made it feel like a friend. We sat at the kitchen table and we ate the apple pie. Margaret had made it from apples grown on the property. The apples were from a tree that had been planted by her grandfather in 1916. The tree was still bearing fruit. The pie was the best apple pie I have ever eaten in my life, and I am not saying that to be dramatic. There was a quality to it I cannot describe, a depth, a slowness, a sense that every step of its making had been done 1,000 times before, by people who knew exactly what they were doing, because they had learned it from people who knew exactly what they were doing. After the pie, Margaret took me on a walk through the rest of the house. The living room had a sofa from 1951. The fabric had been reupholstered twice, but the frame and the cushions were original. The radio in the corner was a wooden cabinet radio from 1948 that still worked. There was no television in the living room. The television was in a small den off the back of the house, and Margaret told me, with a slight smile, that the television was modern because some things had to be modern. She watched the news in the evening. Daniel watched football on Sundays. Caitlin sometimes watched a streaming show on a tablet in her bedroom. The family had not rejected modernity completely. They had just decided which parts of it were allowed in the house and which parts were not. Margaret took me upstairs. She showed me the bedroom that had been her bedroom as a child. It was now Caitlin's bedroom. The wallpaper had been replaced once, in 1968, with a pattern very similar to the original. The bed was the same bed Margaret had slept in as a child. The dresser was the same dresser. The mirror over the dresser was the same mirror. Caitlin had her own things on the dresser, of course. A jewelry box, a small photograph of her grandmother, a book. But the room itself was a room that had held 3 generations of girls becoming women, and the room had not been remodeled to accommodate any of them. The room had simply opened its arms and let them in. Margaret told me, as we stood in that bedroom, that she did not consider the house frozen. She considered it kept. She said freezing was something that happened to a thing without intent. Keeping was something you did on purpose. She said her family had kept the house. They had kept the kitchen. They had kept the calendar. They had kept the sofa. They had kept the apple tree. They had kept the bedroom. They had kept the way of being a family that the house had always supported. And in keeping all of those things, they had also kept the year. They had kept 1955. Not as a costume, not as a reenactment, as a continuity, as an unbroken line. I asked her, finally, what would happen to the house when she was gone? Daniel was at the kitchen table again by then. Caitlin was washing the dishes. Margaret looked at her son and her granddaughter, and then she looked at me and she said, "My son will live here. My granddaughter will live here. When I am buried in the cemetery across from the church, the calendar will still be on the wall. When my son is buried next to me, the calendar will still be on the wall. When my granddaughter has a child, and that child is old enough to understand, the calendar will still be on the wall. And that child will look at the picture of the sleigh, and the horses, and the little red barn, and the man and the woman in the sleigh, and that child will make up a story about where they are going. And the story will be a different story, because the child will be a different child. But the picture will be the same picture. And the wall will be the same wall. And the house will be the same house. And the year will be the same year. I left the house at 3:45. The early November sun was already low. I drove out of Centerville on the same road I had come in on. I passed the stoplight at the corner. It cycled to red. I waited. There were no other cars. I waited the full 30 seconds. The same 30 seconds the timer has been running since 1963. The light turned green. I drove on. I want to tell you, before I close this episode, what I have come to think these 10 towns mean. Because I have driven a lot of miles for this one. I have eaten a lot of pie. I have slept in a lot of beds that were older than I am. And I have come to believe something that I did not believe when I started. I used to think that towns like these were stories of failure. I used to think they were towns that lost, towns that did not catch the wave, towns that the rest of America passed by because the rest of America was going somewhere better. I do not believe that anymore. I think these towns are something else. I think these towns are the negative space of the American century. They are the shape of what the country chose not to be. Every Walmart that did not get built in Beaufort, Wyoming is a decision. Every chain pharmacy that did not get built in Mineral, Virginia is a decision. Every fast food franchise that did not get built in Lucas, Kansas is a decision. Every page of a wall calendar that did not get turned in a kitchen in Centerville, Pennsylvania is a decision. And those decisions, taken together, are a kind of America that the rest of us forgot was possible. The cost of those decisions is real. The young people leave. The schools close. The hospitals close. The data falls off the federal report. The towns get smaller and smaller until, in some cases, they disappear entirely. The Nanza will not exist forever. Centerville will not exist forever. Eureka might. Whittier probably will, because the building is too solid to fall down on its own. But the small ones, the very small ones, are running out of time in a way that no act of preservation can entirely prevent. And yet, while they are still here, they are here. While Margaret Voss is still standing in her kitchen, slicing apple pie under a Currier and Ives calendar that has not moved since 1955, the year 1955 is still alive in the world. While Marian Petrosky is still pouring beer behind the bar at the Owl Club in Eureka, Nevada, 1895 is still alive in the world. While Howard Becker is still walking his border collie down the dirt road in Bonanza, Colorado, the entire idea that a person can live in a place that the rest of the country has forgotten is still alive in the world. And while those things are alive in the world, the rest of us, the ones who live in the cities and the suburbs and the strip-malled exurbs of the modern American economy, have somewhere to go to remember that we did not have to become what we became. We could have become this instead. Some people did. That is what these towns are. They are not failures. They are not curiosities. They are not theme parks. They are the held breath of the country. They are the part of America that decided what it was going to be a long time ago and has refused to be talked out of it. They are an argument. A quiet, stubborn, handwritten, hand-stitched, hand-baked, hand-kept argument against the idea that change is the same thing as progress. Some of them will lose. Some of them will win in the only way a small town can win, which is by simply continuing to exist for one more generation. All of them are worth seeing while there is still time. If you watched this whole way through, do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, leave a comment and tell me which of the 10 towns you would actually want to spend a week in. I will read every comment. I always do. Some of you will say Whittier, because the idea of a whole town in a single building is the kind of thing that hooks a brain and does not let go. Some of you will say Eureka, because 19th century downtowns are a drug. Some of you will say Centerville, because there is something about that calendar that you cannot stop thinking about. There is no wrong answer. They are all real places. They are all still standing. They will not all be standing forever. Next episode, I am going to take you somewhere harder. The 9 towns I showed you tonight, plus the one I saved for last, are towns that froze on purpose, or by accident, or by geography, or by stubbornness, but in every single case, somebody is still living there. Somebody is still making the pie. Somebody is still pouring the beer. Somebody is still walking the dog down the dirt road. Next episode is about the towns where nobody is doing any of that anymore. Next episode is about the towns that nobody wants to come back to. The towns where the door is open because nobody bothered to close it. The towns where the calendar fell off the wall a long time ago and nobody picked it up. The towns where the volunteer fire chief died and there was no one to take his place. The 1950s are nostalgia. What comes after the 1950s, in the towns where the keeping stopped, is something else. Something that does not give you apple pie. That is next time. I am Report State. The diner on Main Street in the town I will not name has the same menu since 1958. The handwriting is the granddaughter's. She practices it at night by lamplight after the dinner rush is done, with a blue ballpoint pen on a sheet of waxed paper, and she has been practicing it since she was a little girl. When her grandmother died, the granddaughter took the menu down from the wall and held it in her lap for an hour and did not say a word. Then she put it back on the wall. And she has been writing in her grandmother's hand ever since. She will be the one running the diner for another 20 years probably, maybe 25. After that, who knows? After that, somebody will have to decide whether to print a clean menu or whether to find another granddaughter somewhere who is willing to learn how to write the way her grandmother wrote. I do not know what that town will choose. I do not know what any of these towns will choose. I only know what they have chosen so far. And what they have chosen so far is a thing worth watching. A thing worth driving to. A thing worth sitting at a counter for. on a stool that has been sat on by 1,000 people who have all gone home long ago, and ordering a cup of coffee from a pot that has been brewed the same way for 70 years, and sipping it slowly, and looking out the window at a main street that has not changed, and thinking about what it would have been like if your own life had been lived in a place like this. If your own kitchen had a calendar on the wall that did not turn. If your own grandmother had taught you how to write her hand. If your own town had said, "No, we are not going to do it the way they want us to do it. We are going to do it our way. We are going to do it the slow way. We are going to do it the kept way. We are going to do it until we can't anymore. And then we are going to do it for one more day after that." These towns are still doing it for one more day, and then one more. Drive carefully out there. The roads to the small ones are not always paved. The cell service is not always there. The gas station might be closed by the time you arrive. Bring a paper map. Bring cash. Bring patience. Bring an appetite for pie. Knock on the door of the post office between 9 and 11:30 in the morning and ask for the postmaster and tell her Report State sent you.
She might let you sit on the bench outside for a while.
She might tell you a story you did not expect to hear. She might point you toward a house at the edge of town on a slight rise overlooking the valley, where a calendar has been hanging on a nail for 70 years. She might not. Some doors only open for the people who already know how to knock. Until next time, keep your eyes open. Keep your camera in your pocket some of the time. Keep your hands free for shaking. Keep your mouth shut when an old man at a counter starts to talk, because the old man at the counter has a story you are never going to hear anywhere else. And once he is gone, that story is gone with him, and there is no streaming service in the world that is going to bring it back. Keep the calendar on the wall if you have one. Keep the house if you can. Keep the way of being a family that the house has always supported. That is the whole episode. That is the whole point. That is the whole country, or at least the part of it that is still standing in the rooms where it began. I am Report State. Thank you for watching. Thank you for driving with me. I will see you on the next road.